welcome back to Cast Me to Hell with me, Seb.
And with me, Robbie.
And this week we bring you straight from Netflix the new chapter in the Fear Street saga, I guess.
Well, I don't really know what to call it.
It's not really. I mean, Prom Queen is obviously the one, but it's not really the same connection the rest of the previous ones had together.
Yeah,
the previous trilogy that we got. What was it now? 4 years ago.
About that, it was. Yeah. Was it after? It was.
Was it 2021?
Yeah, maybe.
So not long, but people were still somewhat COVID.
Still COVID-y, wasn't it?
Yeah, we were still kind of stuck in houses at some point of around that time.
It was an odd time frame.
Yeah, it was. So we still had that back and forth, and the original one became a kind of like a fairly big hit for Netflix, and a fairly big was talked about quite a lot, especially within the horror community anyway. But I saw it peeking out into other sectors of people who are not necessarily just horror fans, kind of thing. It had quite a big reach, I think, because again people were struggling at that point for content.
Yeah, maybe it really snowballed, didn't it? Because we were recording episodes weekly and releasing them. Everybody was kind of buzzing about it online, and there hasn't really been that much for Prom Queen. I'm trying to avoid calling it Prom Night.
I mean, I also think with the last one, to be honest, I think the Fear Street one, it came out, it said it was going to be this 3-week event, so it made it feel like it was something to look forward to. But I also think that until people saw the first one, it maybe didn't balloon as much as it did, whereas the first one was, the 1994 one, was quite strong.
Yeah. And
a lot of people actually got drawn into, there's a bit of a mystery here. And people wanted to know the answers to the mystery, and obviously, week by week, you had 3 films in yet. It was almost like a TV series giving you a bit at a time.
A little bit, yeah.
So people were still started chatter about, how does this work, and what's going to be the twist of this, based on the R.L. Stine collection of books, which there's tons of them, Fear Street stories.
Yeah, I read that there were tons,
but only elements are technically fully taken. That was a young adult novel. It didn't have nearly the level of violence that the actual films ended up having.
Yeah.
And that includes this new one as well. Because it's all, I believe, from what I just had a little quick peek into what is the book like before, and apparently only about 3 people die in the Prom Queen book.
Okay. So kind of much less.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we are here to talk about that. We will obviously link, I guess, some occasional wandering thoughts that come towards the original collection of the trilogy that was released years ago. But for this first section, we're going to be spoiler-free for the first couple of minutes. So that's why we didn't reveal how many people actually die in this film. People do die in this. Yes. I mean, it is a horror film, so that's not a spoiler.
And we have actually given away that more than 3 people died.
I guess we have.
We have given one
more
spoiler.
Than 3 people die.
And what I will say is, make sure to hit that subscribe button, and be sure to vote for the Cast Me to Hell Boys as your prom podcast king and queen. You could decide which one is which. Just remember to hit that subscribe button and leave us a lovely review. We have covered Fear Street when it came out, as I said, so if you want to hear us talk about them in depth, kind of how they link and some of the themes and the inspirations, I guess, you know that were prevalent in each one, go back and listen to them. They were quite some time ago, but we do have them in our back catalogue. I mean, I was quite hyped about this film when it was coming out, and then I started to see on Letterboxd quite a lot of negative reviews.
I mean, I was hyped when I first heard that this was coming.
Yeah,
and then I suddenly found out it was actually being released, and I felt like there was no. That was part of the thing. It felt like there was no build up.
Yeah, there wasn't really. I don't think there was much.
I found it on a poster that said May 25th. I was like, oh, it's coming out, is it? I literally expected it. I knew it was coming this year, but I was expecting it later in the year, or to have a little bit more of a, we're back with this Fear Street, another segment of that. And I guess it's the way Netflix works, where it just kind of every once in a while just throws something out.
They're odd, aren't they? Because there is a coming soon section that they seem to do now, and that's how I saw this, because you can set reminders. But they do also just randomly sometimes release things. Like, I think Halloween Ends came on, and they didn't tell anyone. They
Yeah,
just
yeah.
have Halloween Ends, mate, and took something else off, you know? So,
And that's what,
very odd.
even with the original stuff, they're not always that good at really, because they don't feel like they need to promote it. But I think the difference is, you know, like I said with the original ones, was the COVID worked in the favour of the Fear Street people. You know, COVID working in favour of people, but you know what I mean. But it allowed more people to kind of get about it, get to see it, and a lot of studios were holding a lot of stuff back. So like, we actually can't produce more stuff, so we need to spread stuff out more often, you know. So when suddenly in the middle of there being a bit of a drought of actual new content, or even being able to go like properly to cinemas and things like that, the idea of suddenly having these event movies was like, oh shit, yeah, awesome. Which is something that this film does not get to benefit from. Where we are now, we're 5 years later, 4 years later of like that era, away from the COVID era. We've now gone into where a lot of studios have all got their own streaming service. There's a million streaming services. There's so much fucking content out there. Horror films are released, you know, whether it's through Shudder itself or whether it's through Amazon Prime or things. They all have their own little horrors that they release every once in a while, and it all starts to get a little bit like, none of these feel like events anymore. None of these feel like something that a lot of people are like building up to anymore. And I think a little bit of that with this like hype that came from Fear Street years ago. I will also say, I feel that Netflix, for who they were, when Fear Street was such a big, like, kind of, it seemed like it was a big film. Maybe the numbers don't match up to what the chat was on it. Yeah. But it feels like they took a long time to get the next one out. It feels long for a horror film that would not have taken long, and I think this only took about like less than 6 months to actually get the whole film done and dusted.
Yeah, I'm surprised it takes. I mean, unless there's something to do with trying to get all of the rights to it. Yeah. I kind of feel like. I
mean, I think R.L. Stein's been on board the whole
way through. Seems like he would be. I feel like, given the nature of how many different kind of Fear Streets there are. Because I did see something about maybe another like 7 or 8 that could be adapted, and the brief like synopsis of them. I kind of feel like I'm surprised Netflix didn't start trying to churn out a Fear Street once a year. Yeah, around the same
that's
time,
what I was expecting afterwards. Even with like the where it ended with that, the previous films had the whole fire curse. Yeah, we kind of followed that kind of part. But it also said that that had affected so many different stories that there were extra ones you could follow. But that wasn't the whole like main part of, I believe, of the books and stuff like that. That was kind of something that was taken and a way to interweave some different stories together to make what you had with that previous trilogy, where it took like elements from several different books to make these kind of stories. Whereas this one, for the most part, is just taken from one book, the Prom Queen one, where they've taken a lot of liberties with that story and basically adapted it in their own way. And I believe I even just read that the director Matt Palmer, I think it is, who I couldn't find any other credit stuff on, so he's a new director, didn't really know the Fear Street books and stuff, wasn't really that thing, so he's kind of just like skimmed and then just taken the parts. He's just taking the parts he was the one to do.
Well, it's kind of, I find it quite interesting. We've literally just finished watching it, and it may be that the more time I sit with it, I may feel differently. But I almost feel like the original Fear Street trilogy was so well done because it was connected. It was 3 very kind of different, distinct vibes when it came to the films that they were making, and I almost feel like this film it made a rod for its own back by just being a very basic slasher film. I said I'm going to try not to call it Prom Night, and it does remind me of that level of like slasher films from the golden age. So stuff like Prom Night, Sorority Row, The Initiation, stuff where it's kind of like one mostly taking place in one area. And they just tell a very basic story, and the characters and the actual kind of plot points itself suffers but you do get some fun gore. Maybe that's kind of. I feel like maybe people went into it thinking, "Oh, it's got to be this really interconnected thing." Or I don't know what people expected.
I mean, that's. I think when you went to the original Fear Street, you were almost expecting with the first one to just to be a slasher.
Maybe.
So like, there was a lot of like, I think low expectation of what this will probably be. This will probably just be a fun throwaway, nostalgic throwback to 90s slashers.
Yeah.
And then it ended up being that actually there's a deeper story here, and there's actually like a supernatural element here. So there's a lot more to kind of play with. You know, the killers are not going to be just the standard, we don't know who the killer is, because there's a kind of somewhat possession part to all of this as well. You know, which it led to a lot more interesting, the way that they could build in different like interesting different kinds of killers and stuff like that, especially in the second part of the 78 one. You know, when you had all those different types of killers that came out at the same time, which was my
really
favourite part. And the third part, you know, lots of people normally were not as completely as keen on, but it was still, you know, it played it differently. The third part went all the way back to 1666, and then midway through it jumped over to 1990, back to 1994. So it played with the audience, and each one really played with the audience in an interesting way. It wasn't just a straightforward slasher, but it also wasn't over exposition of the, you know, the supernatural elements that kind of bog some of these down sometimes. It all felt quite like fun, nostalgic, and like, you know, it was it was having a lot of fun with it. It wasn't over. Whereas with this one, like you just said, it's pretty much, it's just a slasher. It's hard to go from that kind of quite original style, combining the elements of a slasher that you really love, like the 1994 had really fun, you know, I Know What You Did Last Summer, Scream, you know, it did that really well.
What its influences on its sleeve.
But then also suddenly brought you twists and turns. You were like, oh crap, okay, I didn't realise any of this. And it left you on kind of cliffhangers and notes of things that you wanted to find out more information. You wanted to know the backstory. There's nothing here that you want to know that backstory, sadly. There's no real deeper rooting here that you expected there to be, a little bit.
Yeah, I was expecting it. It was only literally when it got to about 2/3 of the way through, when we had like 25 minutes left. Yeah. And, you know, we get to a certain point, and I was like, yeah, I don't think there isn't going to be any subversion here. No. Like, there isn't going to be anything like that. This is literally just like,
This is the whodunit slasher.
This is the whodunit slasher. But this is like Prom Night, where you basically, I don't know if you've seen Prom Night, not the dog shit remake, but the Jamie Lee Curtis one, and it opens up as like a lot of the kind of second wave of slashers, you know, the ones that Swam in the Wake do. It opens up with like something that happens many, many years ago. Mm-hmm. Then it comes to the present day, and this person has escaped from a mental asylum, and then people start getting killed off, and then at the end they're like, here's the twist, and that's all you need to know. And I was by this kind of like 2/3 way through Prom Queen, I was like, this is the film that we're getting, you know. It wears the aesthetic, and it wears the aesthetic of the 90s or like the 88 beautifully. Like, it looks great. I like the soundtrack, I like the costumes, but it almost feels like the director was just like, oh, I'm just going to make a film that would have been out.
I just want to do an 80s slasher.
I just want to do an 80s slasher, but not really, apart from updating the kills with some kind of more modern gore. I just want to make something that's basically that. So I think
that to be honest, and that's what, from just reading an article about the director and about his thoughts on it, that's basically what I got, is the fact that he was like, I got to make an 80s slasher film. I think so. He kind of approached it in that way, instead of approaching it more within the mythology and the idea of, could we find a way to like show a story that takes place with that, you know?
Because in the original Fear Street, they keep talking about like the town's almost like a character. They keep talking about like this curse on the town and the trauma that people have in it. And
everyone seems to know about it.
Everybody knows about it, but not in this film.
78, but they know about it 6 years later in 94, but they don't know about it in 88. It's a bit of a weird thing. And again, I guess that we're delving a bit into that, but we're not. going into full spoiler there, but it's just more like it's a weird thing that it's more to temper your expectations. If you haven't seen this, if you're really expecting, I was waiting for little links, little nods, and apart from an occasional like mention about this is the worst since 1978 or so, little things like that. There wasn't really, but the weird thing is we're at, what is it? Shady. I was thinking
Shady Grove.
I was thinking Sunnyside.
Sunnyside.
That's the nursery in Toy Story 3. The Sunnyside nursery.
I think it is literally Shadyside. Maybe.
Yeah.
I said to you, was this the same town?
Yeah.
But it might as well not have been, because apart from a couple of things...
It feels weird that it doesn't fit in here. Yeah, it feels weird that isn't this curse still meant to be about and active, and it has been. So why don't the people here know, and why isn't this still part of the plot in some way? We know it's not going to be resolved, that part of the plot. It's not going to be resolved in this story because that's already been done. But that doesn't mean you can't tell stories that revolve around the events that still happened around it. Because otherwise it now feels a little bit like in 1994 they should have been talking about the massacre that happened just 6 years ago in the thing, and it kind of disrupts the whole kind of...
It does, doesn't it? It's odd.
That, of them still being linked into this town, and there's only very minimal things, again, it's not as... I'm not going to tell you what happens in this part, but it's, there's a mid-credit scene, and it has possibly the only slight link that we get in the film. That's it, yeah. I won't say what's happened there, but... into more of the, you've talked about some of the things that are positive. Now, it sounds like it's not... once you take away the element basically of the idea that you're expecting a major Fear Street subversion that you got the first time, and this is where I think the majority of negative reviews has come from, is the fact that people were expecting something to subvert that or link into it more, and sadly you could probably just remove Fear Street from the title and just go Prom Queen, because it feels like we're just making the Prom Queen. Like, this is the name of the 80s nostalgic slasher film we've decided to try and make here, and if you take it on its own merits, then there's plenty to like here as an 80s slasher film.
Yeah, I think
as a throwback 80s slasher film, and that's where my mind started just having to go. Right, we're just watching an 80s style slasher film, and I can get down with that.
Yeah, that's
as a bit of fun.
Yeah, and I definitely think it had some fun to it. Like there was the first kill that you get, and we'll go into it when there are spoilers, is strangely subverted and strangely subdued.
Yeah.
And we were both like, watching this point, and we were like, I don't know why this is getting such bad reviews. And then this kill happened. Yeah. And we were like, maybe all the kills are like this.
Yeah. So yeah, the first kill which you expect in this kind of film, any 80s film or even in 90s films, you'd expect the first kill should be a bit of a shit, like, or that I didn't expect that person to kill, or things like that. It tries to do something along that vein and spectacularly fails. It's the worst kill in the entire film, and it's possibly one of the weaker slasher kills I've seen. Yeah. It's just so lacking in anything. Which
I guess I try to find a silver lining. I guess you want to get the worst kill done first. You don't want to have the worst kill.
I mean, if you're planning to go like really and build up to being better, then they certainly do. Yeah, they certainly do start with something weak. I mean, because based on this first one, you'll be wondering if they've decided to stick closer to the young adult roots of the original story, because it's pretty tame and fairly bloodless kind of thing.
Yeah, and just it
just seems a bit of a waste of the actress that they have portrayed.
And it's a bit nonsensical that we said, which we'll get into with the spoilers. Yeah. But I think overall the kills were pretty decent, and the level of gore was good.
It does really pick up. So don't switch off after that first one and be like, oh no, this is just not working for me.
But it finds its feet.
It has some inventive kind of style ones, and it has a little bit of a dark humour at times. There's a couple of parts of the kills. Yeah. One involving a door, which was quite funny, and one, other ones involving, someone looking at an appendage.
Yeah.
Not a penis.
Yeah, not a penis this time.
There's no penis dropped. Not yet.
Not yet. But yeah, I mean, overall, I thought that the gore was good. They pepper in this kind of thing, and I don't know whether this is me yet again kind of falling hook, line and sinker for the Fear Street. Oh, maybe things have got to be a bit more connected. Things have got to come out a little bit. But they pepper in about like the main character and how, you know, there was an incident with her parents at their prom, and you know, I was kind of like, oh, so is this going to be connected to it? And is this going to be something that really plays out? But it did very much feel like, you know, my Bloody Valentine, kind of like something's happening. Oh, we're not really going to talk about it right up until the end.
Yeah,
that kind of thing,
we don't even get this original like scene shown in a flashback or a part which again like is quite 80s to start with a
flashback or something like that,
or
you know,
a horrific event that happened and then go forward. But it doesn't waste time on that. It just talks about it, and it does play into something later in the film. But it's not. It's not really a major thing. Like, it is one thing where straight away you'll be like, oh right, that was where straight away I was looking for a link. Like, is this therefore there you go. Here, is our main character, is she related to someone who was something in, I don't know, 78 or whatever, what time frame we looking at, kind of thing. And then you're like, oh, that was only 10 years ago. That wouldn't work. That doesn't make sense. I was like, you very quickly realise that no, this isn't connected. When it so easily feels like it could have been connected. Yeah. Like, it just feels a little bit, again, like I did mention that the who they've given the directing and the writing to on this one, same writer director, and I think one other person might have been a bit of a writer. Feels like they were a bit like they just wanted to make a film and they've decided to slap the Fear Street across it suddenly.
Yeah.
And it doesn't feel like this should have been the next step in the thing. People wanted to see, there were so many good killers in the original Fear Street that you could have just taken from, even if you're not going off of the books. And I know a lot of that stuff actually some of that didn't occur in the books. But if we're talking in the Netflix story of the world, there are loads of killers they introduced in 78 that you could have literally made a whole horror film around, which would have been interesting and still would have had some of those supernatural roots inside of it. So it's just interesting that they've gone with a kind of, mass standard, 80s slasher killer and nothing more.
That's my main thing, is it just feels disconnected, It just feels, you're right, it feels like if they'd have got rid of Fear Street and they'd have just called it Prom Queen, and it just wore the aesthetics of something from that. Because I thought visually, it looked great. I thought costumes were great, hair was great. It felt like this could have just come out with those films that I mentioned. You know, and it would have just slotted in easily with them. But I think the expectation of Fear Street and the expectation that maybe this is going to be linked, even in some small way, kind of just left this odd disconnect, really.
I think so. I think that will be the main thing for anyone who's listening to this part right now who hasn't actually watched the film yet. If you're thinking about it, or you haven't decided to pull the trigger or whatever, or you're just wondering about what people's thoughts are so far, it's going to be that part of, basically, if you're in the mood for kind of, a somewhat fun 80s slasher, then this will probably be right up your street. If you're going in with the expectation of something that's going to build on the lore of Fear Street and going to build more into what you got with that original trilogy, then that's what's going to be the letdown here, is the fact that we've got an installment that, to be fair, people have waited like 4 years for, and sadly they've decided to bring one out that doesn't really connect to the other ones. It's got some strong kills, to be fair. The twists that come, that you'd expect towards the end with a masked killer and stuff like that. It works well enough. It works well. It has an alright kind of, final kind of showdown in some way. It has quite a good couple of gory scenes that build up into some of the reveals and stuff. So again, as an 80s, it's pretty much as good as some of those second tier 80s horrors. It works just as well as that. Sadly, it's just not a great Fear Street film.
Which is the difficult thing, because the original Fear Streets were so good. That this just feels like a bit of a wet fart. I think that's the best way of describing it. I
feel that's probably a good place. A wet fart is where to leave the spoiler-free part of it, and time to move into spoiler territory, I think.
Well, I mean, if you've joined us thus far, then I would remind you to obviously hit that subscribe button and leave us a lovely review. Go and watch Prom Night. See, yeah, I've already fallen for it. Prom Night.
Prom Night.
Yeah, I think it's probably a better film than Prom Night. Go and watch Prom Queen, and then come back and join us as we discuss the spoilers, because I think that's kind of what we're both chomping to kind of get into now.
Yeah.
So this is your final warning. Hit that subscribe button, leave us a lovely review, watch Prom Queen, and then come back and
compare it with Prom Night and decide which one you prefer.
Yeah, decide which one you prefer. and obviously the big spoiler is you see Chris Klein's penis. He hangs brain within the first 5 minutes. He's the teacher, so it's wildly inappropriate, but he can't help himself. That's kind of his
mid-lesson.
He flops on the table and goes, "What do you think about
how
that, then?
Sweet it is to be loved by you."
And then he puts it away, and nobody acknowledges it. I kind of get it, they're building towards
it.
I mean,
literally, if they had Chris Klein just do even just a little bit of singing in this film, I would have given an extra star.
An extra star, definitely. Well, I just kept calling him Ozstriker.
Yeah, Ozstriker.
Yeah.
This is what Ozstriker did. Stephen, this takes place 10 years before American Pie.
Yeah, it's some kind of Back to the Future style thing. I mean, where do you want to start with the spoilers? I don't think it's a complete shit like I'm seeing people say online.
No, I mean it's really hard. It's a really hard, and I can understand why people are giving it negative. It's like we said in the spoiler-free part. It's if I'm rating it as a Fear Street film connected to the previous films, it's a low rating.
It's because the litter, yeah.
If I'm rating it if I disconnect it and just take it as an 80s slasher little throwback kind of film, then it's a fairly, it's a pretty well-made little slasher. It works, it's not a great slasher, it's not of the hype, but it's got some good elements. It's a little bit cheesy, it's a little bit thing, it's what you expect from like a late 80s slasher almost. The 88 is the right kind of thing. It's as they were starting to like die out, but it works well, and as you already said, it probably is better than quite a few like Sorority Row and Prom Night and stuff like that, where, let's be honest, some of them were okay, but they weren't great. Or what's the train one?
Oh, Terror Train,
stuff like that.
Where they randomly just have like a 10-minute section of David Copperfield doing magic, and you're just watching that. Film was genuinely wank. Yeah. It was so awful.
But that's what I mean. Like, if you compare this, then this is a better made for
definitely.
What I mean, and it's perfectly slots in with majority of slashes that we kind of tend to get in kind of our throwaway streaming kind of world of slashes. Yeah. I'd say it's up there as a perfectly well made. It's got some interesting parts, but it's generally, if we start off with kind of, our characters, like Laurie, our main character and stuff like that, I mean, a lot of the characters, sadly, one thing that was again strong in the Fear Street films was the fact that it had some quite standout characters.
Yeah.
It had characters that died and you were like, for fuck, like, I really didn't want them to die. I didn't expect them to die, and that's horrible. They didn't deserve to die like that kind of thing. There were, I can't remember what the character was called now, but the one who got the bread slicer.
We spoke about that
in the episode, being like, fucking hell,
Jesus
not only
Christ.
is that a horrific death, but the character really didn't deserve to be the one to get that kind of death. Like, I remember talking, like, I think there's another character in the same film who were like, that guy, he deserved to get that. But she did not deserve to get that shit. You know what I mean? Like, that kind of thing. It doesn't have really any of those big standout-ish characters.
No.
That really think. These are kind of blandish surface level characters. You've got some parents who give a little bit more flair at times, some bigger actors kind of thrown in there, more well-known faces that kind of add little elements, I guess, but there's still no depth real to the characters here.
No.
We are watching, we get some nice stuff with Laurie, getting to know that she's kind of the outsider, the kind of the old Scarlet Letter kind of, like, because of what's happened in her past, like, everyone looks at her because they believe her mum is the one who killed her father.
Yeah, the prom.
Even though there's no proof of it, like, kind of thing, so she's still there, but that's kind of gone over her entire life. And the whole reason she wants to be a prom queen is basically because she wants to be able to prove to people that she can make a difference and change a way. And she almost wants to be the popular person purely because, for that sake of the fact that everyone looks at her in this way, that she is the daughter of a killer.
But then that's never really, like, they bring that in at the start, but it feels like it's just kind of peppered throughout, and this whole mystery of like what actually happened to her mum and what happened on that prom night.
It feels like it needed a flashback.
It felt like it needed a flashback.
Or it needed the opening scene to be basically the mother on a prom night in, whatever it was.
Or it needed to not be there, because it feels like it just, there was a bit where like it, at the very end, I'll be vague on the killers because somebody may have just been like, I'm just going to keep listening anyway. Some fool.
Go away.
Yeah, go away. Be gone. Hit the subscribe button.
It's too late now.
It's too late. They just go, oh yeah, by the way, I killed your dad. And it's very much like, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
It feels like it's not really picked up.
Yeah.
And you're right. It should have. I feel like if they wanted to, they should have had that opening thing where somebody gets killed, her dad gets killed, and then maybe like have this be part of it, because there were points, and particularly at the start, where I was like, oh, so this has got to be related to what happened in the original prom, because it feels like that's where the story's going. That's going to be really relevant as the killer's motivation and as the kind of the crux of the story. Now it's the daughter who's running for prom queen.
Yeah.
So is it an old flame of the mum, or is it the original killer? Like, what's going on?
Yeah.
And it
something like that, someone's not alive, or dad's not even dead, or you start wondering to like a million different kind of things. To be fair, one thing the film does do well is the red herrings.
I was about to say that, because there were a couple of points where we were like,
it could literally be like so many different like groups of people that some better than others, some worse than others. The good old we are into sports.
We are into sports.
The good old Chris Klein popped up fairly early as like he seems like the build of a guy who's going to be a killer. He seems like he's prominent enough, that he's going to be a killer, and the whole like door. But I mean, the plus side of that is that even though that popped up earlier, there were enough things that made you question throughout that maybe
it's somebody else.
Make a good tree, the deputy head and her son, or even the deputy head and the head teacher who follows every little rule, or even you've always got the boyfriend that could, the possible boyfriend. You've even got the weird little like ones that follow around, like our main
the Melissa Tiffany,
our main one, Tiffany, who are like little psychos for her and stuff like that. You've got all these little groups of characters that you're like, oh, it could be. And then there was even the background of you had a mum show up earlier in the film and then doesn't show up again. You're thinking mum could be back to get revenge against the. I started thinking, feels like the whole mum coming back and being like, this is revenge for everything you've done to me for the last, for ousting me when I actually did nothing, kind of thing.
I'm going to make it so my daughter wins and beats everyone.
Yeah,
doesn't go anywhere.
But mum doesn't go. Mum never appears again. It feels like, again, like as we get towards the ending and stuff, like jumping around as always, but that it would have felt appropriate as mum lives across the street for mum to appear possibly in that final bit to be like, actually, fucking hell, you were the one that basically destroyed my whole life. But instead, they just decide, we're not going to waste any time on the actual. We're going to pepper in this idea of the mum and the flashback and the terrible thing, but we're never really going to give you enough time to actually get to know the mum to understand what the mum might go through, because the mum only appears in like 2 scenes. One apologising for everything she's gone through without explaining any deeper. Yeah. And the other one basically, can't even remember what she did. She was in the kitchen doing something. I mean, that was about it.
And it feels very like, and I guess that's like a lot of the characters of the film, is it feels very half baked. Yeah. Like I remember when I'm using Prom Night as an example, but I remember when I watched Prom Night, and then the killer was revealed in that, and I was like, oh, who the fuck is that guy? And I think he'd been in the film, and it was just one of those things where it's just like so forgettable and so kind of like bad that I was just like, oh, okay. And that's kind of how it feels with this. And it's frustrating because part of me is like, if they're just wanting to make a late 80s like slasher, then they've hit it. Like, yeah, that's good. But then I don't think it's half baked intentionally. You know, like you can't go, like serve me like a half made sandwich and be like, oh, it's deconstructed, and then expect me to be like, I love it. You know, it's I don't know. I just feel like they were going for something, and they almost accidentally got there.
Yeah,
but in the wrong way, you know.
Yeah. The elements are there. It's just, I mean, and again, like you can say, this is the thing where, again, if we're propping up against like 80s slashers, then in which case, you know, all of these problems we're saying are exactly the same problems you'll find in majority of 80s slasher films. So this isn't anything new, and this is why, as an 80s slasher, it kind of it works. It's serviceable, you know. It might be lacking one or two of those elements, you know, that you normally expect, like that kind of horrific beginning or like how everything turned and changed. But it has, you know, Circuit probably has over a lot of those actually ones is that, you know, it looks better.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Better soundtrack. The
soundtrack's really good.
Yeah, the 80s, even the score is pretty, you know, good. It's intense at times.
I thought the score was probably the highlight of it. You expect there to be an 80s soundtrack, and it was. The 80s soundtrack was good, but the score felt kind of really authentic for the time as well, and was really banging. You know, I love a score. I really enjoyed it, and to be honest as well, I can't really fault the cast for the most part. No one's really, you know, with what they've got to work with, you know, they're doing exactly, you know, what you'd expect. You know, the girls, you know, a lot of the Prom Queen girls, again, it's not quite as like built up as it is. It feels very much just catfighting, kind of, you know, kind of like hating each other. And even when they try to develop a little bit more into some of them kind of going against Tiffany, who's kind of the queen bee, sadly there's just not enough time given to build into that. But you know, that whole, you know, the one girl versus this clique of bitches kind of thing, you know, kind of works in the film. You know, it adds some good points. You know, some of the, like, they've got like the dance scene and stuff like that, which adds a kind of weird kind of 80s cheesiness to it, which I thought kind of worked. And I thought everybody online was kicking off about the dance off, and I was like, it's fine. Like,
I was like, right. That's 80s, you know, it's doing a bit of an 80s style thing with it,
and it's not the most egregious like problem with the film.
No.
You know, like a 30 minute like a 30-minute dance off.
If it was a 30-minute
dance off,
then
maybe, but like a 30-second dance off to Gloria, you know, it's not the film's biggest problem. And speaking of the cast, like, I don't think anybody gave it a particularly bad performance. I think they all, given what they had, I think they all did all right. You know.
No, I mean, that's what I mean. Even the boy Chris Clyde, who I think it's just my 90s nostalgia of him that I love him. But I also know that he can be a bit of a wooden actor at times.
Yeah.
But you know, I think he's all right.
He does look like he's made out of wood. You know, he looks like he's chiseled out of wood. You know, he's quite a handsome chap, but he always reminds me of. You know,
but he's, instead of being marble, he's
just
out of wood. We couldn't afford marble, so we made wood, and that's Chris Klein.
Beautiful creature out of wood. You know those wooden like posable things that you used to get from IKEA.
Art.
Yeah, yeah, he reminds me of like one of those. You know, he's just like his head shape and everything like that. You know what I mean, don't you?
Yeah, like Chris Klein, you have the acting ability of a wooden art model.
Yeah, or he's like Pinocchio,
where you can opposably move the hands and the legs, and the head moves around.
The face doesn't.
But the face has nothing going on. Maybe that's how
they get. That's just what he is. He is actually stop motion.
Yeah.
That's how they do all of it. Yeah, that's what Chris Klein has always reminded me of.
That's who he is.
He's a handsome, nice man.
He is. Know? He seems like a lovely fella. You know what I mean?
Fella.
You've got So we've got Tiffany. Obviously, he's Dan Falconer, the father, who's also got Tiffany Falconer. who is the daughter, who who
She was
plays
good.
good bitch.
Yeah, she was a good bitch.
Yeah, she plays good, is it? And you've also got the mother, played by Catherine Waterston, who I can't seem to actually find what her name was. Nancy Falconer. So you've got your little tramp.
You have your tramps.
You got your tramps. You got your little family kind of
The family
group
dynamic.
here
Yeah.
that's going on. And then there are and they're all pretty strong. I was actually surprised Catherine Waterston, who's done a fair few more actually like dramas and kind of bigger budget thing, was actually in this. To be honest, also to be fair, actually that was true of the vice principal, who I've seen in lots of films. She's a Lily Taylor.
Yeah, I can't remember her name at the time.
Yeah, I've seen. Yeah, she's been like in loads of things, and in fact, I'm fairly certain she's just been cast in the new Hunger Games. So again, I was a bit surprised to see her on just a Netflix slasher horror film. You know what I mean? Not that the original Fear Street didn't have one or two kind of cameos of some bigger like actresses and stuff, but. And then there was, as I stated midway through, there was Ella Rubin as Melissa, who was in Until Dawn that we recently said, and was the main actress. Whereas in this, she was pretty much in the background until suddenly she decides to have a little like goes against Tiffany, and then we've got like 2 scenes of her where she fights back, and suddenly gets to actually like have some dialogue. And suddenly for a moment, I was like, oh, I like that, are we now going to have one of them turn against her and they're going to become an ally of the thing? Which I was like, I quite liked it. She goes against her. She basically tells her not to do it. She gets the punch thrown in her face and stuff like that. Then goes and gets changed. You've got quite a cool scene with her where she's on one side of the mirror and the killer's on the opposite side, which I just thought was... I thought it was a 2-way glass mirror, and I just thought the head teacher was just a diddler who watches the girls in the changing rooms. I mean, I don't know if that is the case.
It's the 80s.
It looks like it was a 2-way, There's plenty of 80s films where like guys stick their cock through a wall. And like that. That's the height of humour back then.
It was, and it was fun.
And it's absolutely fun. You can stick your dick, your balls through anything, and it's absolutely funny. It's not a crime.
No, being a paedophile was like one of the
principle
one of the
to be a paedophile.
Yeah, it's one of the expectations of the job,
Yeah, especially in a slasher film of the 80s or 70s, is that some of the male adult figures should be somewhat in the area of between rapey to somewhere between diddler.
Yeah, but you got to have that kind of vibe.
You've got to have that vibe to get a buy-in.
That's how you survive. But I feel like that was something that the film did quite a lot. Was they opened up with this almost like the only way I could think of it. It's like Mean Girls. Like, I'm walking through the school and this is who this is. This is who this is. We had to rewatch it because I think we got delicious souvlaki. We ordered it at this time. That's what we had, if anybody's interested. And then it feels like after that, you basically have Tiffany. You've got Laurie. You've got Laurie's weird emo friend, who's 100% definitely not a lesbian. And then it feels like
Tiffany's boyfriend, who I can't
can't remember his name, but it then feels like, and a lot of slashers do this, and I feel like I'm walking into the trap where the director would be like, yes, because I made an 80s slasher, that's why I did it. But you basically you'll then see a character for a scene or two, and then they'll die, and then you'll go back to them, and then they'll just... Melissa is a perfect example. She then says, "Oh, I'm going to stand." She then stands up to Tiffany, and then goes off and then dies. And it's very much like that's just how it works. But that is,
that is the classic 80s. It's just weird. I think the odd thing for me, especially when it comes to films like this that were made specifically, so not made for the cinema.
Yeah.
Made for Netflix. Therefore, there's not really so much of a, oh, we should probably try to keep this tight, you know. 'Cause we've got trailers and we've got stuff like that, you know.
And time is a lot more money, you know.
Whereas with a Netflix film, let's be honest, you could make a film that's an hour and 50 minutes instead of an hour and a half like this one was.
Yeah.
And maybe give it that extra 10, 15 minutes to pad out some of these characters before we get to prom night, if you see what I mean. Like,
it gets there quick, doesn't it?
It for the Laurie character, to be fair, it has a few scenes of giving her like working, you know, in the restaurant and stuff like that. So it gives her a few scenes, and Tiffany is quite commonly around as well. So
I thought
you
Tiffany
also
was
get a
good,
few of
you know?
Tiffany's like character. It's just too bad that the others, the other part of the clique, the other prom queens, are not really that built up. And to have a main kind of one, this is Ariana Greenblatt's Christy Renault, who is our first death.
Yeah.
She's introduced basically as the snarky kind of
drug dealer.
Yeah, motorbike riding bad girl kind of thing.
Yeah.
And she's introduced in that opening scene, and she doesn't, apart from sitting in the classroom in that opening scene and that opening like locker bits that they show, you know, things like that.
Yeah.
Where she says it's like better than sex and stuff like that. She doesn't really get much else to do apart from, you know, jumps off her boyfriend's motorcycle, and then we're suddenly into the scene. It's like, well, we didn't really get to know you. And I know we could say with Maya Hawke in the original Safe Fear Street, but even in that, they had a whole introduction of her like working in the store, and we got a few minutes to get to know her, and also one of her friends that works in the other one, and there's a good, like, I'd say that opening is a good 10 odd minutes long, and a lot of that is actually more the build up than it is the full on like the chase and the things like that.
There's more to it, and I
feel like you get to know it, and it also gives a little bit of a character there, like, or even if it's in small scenes. And you do have to do this with horror. You've got to have small scenes that give you a little bit of just a moment to connect a humanity. That's what the good ones do. Yeah, they have to rush through lots of characters really quickly, but you've got to at least give them that kind of scene.
Give them something.
And, you know, even in these, like, if you're going to build her up, like Ariana Greenblatt, if she's going to come in and be a slightly more well-known actress who you're going to have in here to be the first kill.
They do that now. Yeah, you know, that's like
it's a comment from Scream, isn't it? Yeah.
You know.
But they do that, but normally what they do is they kind of somewhat make you assume that they're either going to be the main character or partly related to the main character, or that they're going to be somewhat important, or that they're just a big known, so everyone will be like, oh my god, when they're dead, like, what's happened?
Yeah.
But because no one knows that anyone dies in this film, this is the problem. It's not a Drew Barrymore or many of the Scream ones or Know What You Did Last Summer or any of those ones, because no one knows it's happened.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Usually they're a kind of a catalyst for something to happen, like Drew Barrymore.
This is the preview of what's to come.
The preview of what's to come.
And it's not. It's no one knows it happened to her, and it's not until the boyfriend shows up later and the emo friend kind of thing.
Yeah.
It starts to piece things together about halfway through, or a little bit more. That suddenly it all clicks in, and it then makes you go like, well, all these prom queens are dying, but nobody knew these prom queens are dying. So there's one thing that's kind of that is missing here is the fact that there's normally the reaction that people need to have something to be scared of. And no one's really scared, so then we just get basically this person's going to go off to this room, and this person's going to go off to this room.
Yeah.
They're going to go down to the basement, or they're going to go get changed in the room by themselves, and it's all taking place in like one. You know, I know from reading that actually in the original book it took place over like 6 weeks, and the first person dies early, and people know that someone died. And therefore, there's kind of a spread pattern. And apparently, the prom part only lasts like 1 page in the book.
Oh wow!
Like literally, like it's killed off. Like, it's killed off because of everything that led around it. Which I'm not saying that that's the right way to go, because you've got an hour and a half film, then you don't want to have that much of a stretch of time because that's too much. You know? But at the same time, you want to have a stretch of time where people get to almost react and be part of this. You know, if you're going to have that kind of thing, you know. One by one, they're off. And again, like prom night or something like that, you've got a setting and people don't necessarily know what's going on always and things like that. But
going to that.
But having that death, I just mean, that early death. Just not only, you know, it's pointless, but it's also.
But it would have been a good point where they could link it to the curse. and they could link it into what's happening there, because to speak about it feeling disjointed before we talk about Ariana Greenblatt's actual kind of death, I feel like it's so that's where they could have connected it, because there was that point where you see something where they say like Shady Side School, and I said to you, "Oh shit, is that the one in the in the original?" And you were like, "Yeah." And then it showed a poster for like Camp Nightwing, which is obviously 78.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've only watched the Fear Street films once or twice when they first came out. Then it just feels like it was so disconnected. This didn't have to take place in Shady Side or whatever it was called.
Yeah, Shady Side.
It could have taken.
Yeah,
just in case. It could have taken place anywhere else, because it doesn't have that connection to any of them, and not even in the, apart from a couple of throwaway comments.
It only has stuff like it does say like near the beginning that like the vice principal is trying to reinvent Shady Side because of the town's poor reputation, and basically the stuff that's happened.
Yeah,
but nothing really much deeper than those kind of little comments.
But is that a poor is that a poor poor reputation because there was a murder like at this school 20 years ago at prom, or is that the poor reputation because I'm sure they say in the original like every 6 years or whatever it is, every XYZ somebody goes on a random killing spree, like what is it?
Which is technically here, because I guess we've got 6 years before.
I don't know if it is 6 years, but you know what I mean. Like, there's some period of time where somebody does it. But
6 years would make sense.
6 years would make sense, but it just feels like so disconnected.
But it does have those, I mean, just to say, the only connect again is the final mid-credit scene, which links to the fire symbol kind of thing. And again, I read that the director said that it's originally this script did actually have the whole that the killers in the film, the family of killers we have here, the Falcons. Originally, the parents tried to use the witchcraft, the curse, to actually try to give them a way to do this easier, but they actually couldn't make it work, so therefore had to do it their old-fashioned way. Which
would have which
was a throwaway thing, but they decided to cut all that out, and therefore they only left the mid-credit scene to have somewhat of a link to be like, we could go into this maybe if we follow this up again with another film.
But they should have gone for that.
Yeah.
Because if that would
all it needed to be was a throwaway kind of. It could have been a throwaway scene, a throwaway line.
Yeah.
It didn't need to be much delved into.
No, but it could have been. They could have spoken about it, or at least something.
Literally, could have just had that symbol in the middle of the room where they had the book, and basically in the middle of the room they're writing it off. They could have literally had that thing to be like, we're trying to use it, but it's not working, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So then at least they can walk in and be like, there's the symbol on the ground around this book of all the prom queens. They're trying to use some supernatural.
Yeah.
I don't know. And it doesn't have to be more than that, because it would work almost with the characters to be like that. Actually, they tried it, but it doesn't work for us. So basically, they're not good enough to use it because they're not actually like witchcraft. They're not witches to use the power, so they can't actually make it work for them, kind of thing. So then it will make you question whether they're actually one of the psycho people that have gone mad over the years, or whether they're actually just these are just a standalone case of people that actually tried to use the horrors that they've heard about, and they absolutely failed in it. So they just did it in their own way, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's kind of
little things that the director himself said that he cut out, which is like, but that sounds more interesting.
It sounds more interesting.
It sounds like you've tried to whittle away the parts that linked it to Fear Street because you didn't really want to. Because you didn't want to link it, yeah. So you decided to go with that. So it sounds a little bit like they've, and he even said about he doesn't know if he would return for another because he thinks feels like a franchise where you should keep introducing new directors to bring new fresh ideas to it. It's like, that's fine, that makes sense, that's perfectly a good point of view, but it still needs to bring it to this franchise to make it relevant to this franchise, not just a random. It shouldn't just be a one to just throw out random horrors for that. It shouldn't throw away what made people interested in the first place.
You're kind of squandering your premise there.
It doesn't have, and it doesn't. But that's what I mean. It doesn't even have to be like the whole film is about the witches or the fight. It doesn't need to go back to all of that. it just should have some link to the idea that actually we can have supernatural elements in these films. We can have a slasher film that's still supernatural.
Yeah.
Because you've already established in this world that these events have happened. So why don't you show us the events that happened instead of trying to make up new ones that are not as interesting?
Yeah, it's weird, man. I mean, to talk about, I was about to call her Olivia, to call her Ariana Greenblatt's kind of death.
Yeah.
This is where we watched it and we were both like, okay, maybe if all of the kills are going to be like this, then yeah, maybe this is going to be dog shit.
I mean, it literally is that she walks out into the middle. I think because she thinks that her boyfriend's meeting her there or something like that.
I think that's what it was.
I kind of lost a little bit of a drive of what it was now in my mind. But all I know is she walks into the middle of a thing, and it's just so poorly staged.
It's horrendous.
She walks out right into the centre of this almost lit area of this, like, in the middle of nowhere, looking around, like, well, no, she doesn't.
She doesn't. That's the problem.
She walks and then looks straight in one direction only.
Like an Oblivion NPC. She just stares.
And the killer is not even, like, right behind her. The killer has to walk across this thing to get to it, walks the whole way. No way no one doesn't hear. He's not, like, you can hear the sound.
He's walking.
So it's literally like no way doesn't hear it, and yet she doesn't turn, even though she has plenty of things. And I was there, like, you've introduced this thing, you're going to have a kind of cool, like, subversion here, aren't we? We're going to suddenly have her go, like, here's it, move it out of the way, and we're going to have a bit more of a showdown. Instead, straight away, like, literally, like, I think she slightly turns her head and gets an axe into her through her shoulder, hits the ground, and then we just get one of those classic shot from up,
POV shots,
POV from the ground as the axe comes down on her, lacking in any tension whatsoever.
It was horrendous.
It's unnatural. It was unnaturally shot. No one would move like that. So that was where we're like, oh shit, okay.
This a hodo.
So far the characters seem okay. It's all mainly working. It all feels 80s. It's all shot nicely. There's already some nice score and music kind of coming through.
Yeah.
This is good. Why don't people like it? And suddenly that. And
fucking hell.
Is this what all the deaths are going to... Are we about to have, like, some terribly staged death after death after death? And I'm not saying all of them are perfectly staged, but there's definitely some good ones in here. Or enough gore that you're like, okay, this somewhat makes up for it. Because let's be honest, with these kind of slashers, sometimes a good bit of gore can make up for them. When you get a rampage and stuff like that,
that's
like,
kind of what
we
you
get
want.
in a couple of scenes of this, it's like,
that's kind of what the ticket
helps. And if you want those, then that's definitely what you've got here, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because you've got to kind of go through, I think deaths is probably an easy one to just jump around through deaths kind of thing. Majority of them all take place on the prom night.
Yeah.
So once they're actually there, I don't believe anyone else dies apart from her once they get there.
Yeah, I don't think so.
And the first one we get are two of the ones that go in. Again, I don't know which the names of those ones were. I can't remember. She's gone too. They're gone too early. At that point, I've got to be honest. But the two that go into the room. It's Linda. There you go. Linda and Bobby. I found
Linda and Bobby.
Linda and Bobby.
Isn't that two of the names from Halloween? Linda and Bob.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Nice.
We kept wondering whether a bunch of these are like.
Yeah, we did.
Winks to names and thing, and I think that some of them definitely are.
Linda and Bob definitely are.
So we get a scene where, again, of course, two characters decide, we're going to go off to this secret kind of area. She finds that a bunch of her posters have been sabotaged. She walks off, and again, I was already worried because I heard her make a noise in the dark. She gets stabbed. I was like, man, you're going to follow up the other one with an off-screen death already? Like, is this what we're getting?
Oh, yeah.
But a much better shot is when she comes through the darkness and slowly the light reveals that her stomach is just falling out of her. Cool little shot. Awesome, but what follows it is one of the better deaths in the film, which is the boyfriend who then tries to fight him.
Yeah.
Tries to get hold of one of the box cutters to turn around to get him, gets him knocked out of his hand, and the killer grabs onto the paper slicer basically and slices off one of his hands. And he's obviously screaming, grabs for her paintbrush, fails,
I love that.
Obviously, and he then straight away gets his other hand twisted round and straight and slices off. So he's had both of his hands removed, which is then followed by the funny moment of him trying to open
For
the
the door,
with
yeah.
no hand, like
With
rubbing the
nubbins.
nubs,
Yeah.
rubbing the bloody nubs against the thing. And again, it doesn't come to any major big fit, but like he gets his face then smashed in. You see his nose get crushed against the door. So we don't necessarily see the full on death. I don't.
But it's a gory scene, and it makes up for the earlier one.
Yeah, the earlier one.
I think it does set the tone for a lot of the deaths as well, because they are kind of that level of gore, not like overly gratuitous, but enough that it gets that itch in your brain where you're like, fuck, that was
enough sudden like little spatter gore kind of thing, body parts dropping and stuff like that. And they're just, again, after this they start coming more fairly quickly. You know?
They come.
You've got ones where you're heading down to the basement and gets his head sawn apart.
That was cool.
So the saw, like, just they're next to each other. Suddenly the saw just appears off the side. It goes up for his face and literally starts sawing off the top of his head. And you get to see it. So it's quite like sudden. It's quick, but it's like,
but it's
oh
good,
shit! You're like, oh goddamn. And then
there's an electrocution.
Everyone's electrocuted. Yeah, fine, works for the moment, kind of thing. It's not as gory as it can get, and then obviously you get the friend who then goes into the locker that we've already talked about. And I
really like that scene because that's where we get the reveal that there's two killers, and I wasn't expecting the old two killer.
It's because they'd already shown standalone shots of the single killer by himself working in a room, doing the names off the thing, so it felt like it was going to be a single one.
It's going to be one.
It's not like two killers is like, oh my god, you've revolutionized.
Yeah, it's not like
nothing like that. But
no, it's not. But I think it's done quite well because I quite like the look of the killer as well. You know, they've got this kind of like red, like poncho kind of thing, raincoat. They've got some weird mask. Usually, if one was to nitpick, usually the mask is somehow related to the event, you know, like the mask is always.
You wanted a Valentine's baby face.
Yeah, I wanted a Valentine's baby face. You know, they're always kind of related for the most part. However, obviously in this one, there's no explanation. It just looks cool. And I was saying, I
thought it looked like
Bale.
That picture of Christian Bale in the Batman mask when he's got wide open mouth, like the O face kind of thing.
Yeah,
I thought it looked a bit like Christian Bale.
Well, like I said to you, I watched Urban Legend the night before, and the killer in that was basically just wearing a parka. Yeah, and I was like, "That's fucking."
I always forgot it was just a parka.
It's just a parka. It's so awful.
Yeah,
and how they don't see their face, I don't know. But
which is also really weird because how many amazing urban legends have like creatures of weird features and stuff like that? You could have drawn them and said
a parka. Yeah, they won't suspect that.
Like someone's like, could we? Oh, we could do something like the elongated face of Slender Man, or we could do kind of a creature like hidden, or like a weird like antlerish face.
Yeah.
How about parka?
Yeah, somebody's just seen somebody wearing one and gone, what about a parka?
I don't want to. Yeah, it's like the production. I don't want to spend money on it. I've got a parka in my car.
I've just bought this parka. I mean, you can use it. You'll pay me though. But the character, I think it is Melissa, goes to kind of get away, and when she opens the door, there's the second killer. And I feel like it's done quite nicely.
And even she thinks that she thinks that he's, because she says, how have you... Yeah. As in, like, she still hasn't clocked on that there's two.
It's a two.
So she thinks he's somehow got from behind her to in front of her. How have you done that?
Yeah.
And then obviously turns to get through the head. And
it's done quite well, and I liked that it just casts those seeds of misdoubt that aren't really picked up right until the end. Because until that point you're thinking, maybe it's so-and-so, maybe it's so-and-so. Could be anyone. But then...
2 made it more interesting because it suddenly made duos pop in your head and actually this makes more sense with these duos.
Yeah. And there were people who you suspected, but then they almost had somebody that the duo would make sense. So obviously, Chris Klein and his wife.
Yeah.
At first, I think we suspected Chris Klein, and then you're like, oh, his wife would make good sense as well. And then there was the vice principal, who's real kind of like religious, and then her son, and you're like, oh, that could make sense, So a couple of them start to click into place, and it works quite well.
Chris Klein, I think, was quite often the thing because, to be honest, out of all of them, he looked like a hulking dude.
He is.
One of the killer. Like, I think that I can now see that there was more than one person that actually was in the costumes or whatever. But one of them, like, he's the only dude that was like 6 foot something. Like one of the girls was like, that dude looks big. That is a burly man inside.
Yeah, that's a burly.
Which obviously can always be a stunt man who's doing the whole role and stuff like that. But you're still like, if it is the men and match the body type, then
that's Chris Klein.
It's Chris Klein.
It's the only one.
I can't call that a thing because there are many slasher films that quite often you're like, look at that 6 foot tall man. Oh, Emma Roberts is what, 4 foot?
Yeah, it's Emma Roberts.
It's Emma Roberts. It's Emma Roberts and one of the Culkins. They're both 5 foot.
Yeah, they're both like 5 foot, rather skinny.
It appears that Ghostface was easily
6 foot.
High, 5
6
foot,
foot
6 foot.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
He's really tall.
Yeah. Heels. That's how you answer that. Heels that still make you about 5'2", but you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think a lot of the kills were pretty satisfying, and then you do get that little rampage towards the
rampage. The rampage was an extra little satisfying. It's all there's always like because quite often killers don't reveal themselves in the middle of a crowd the way it does. I mean, old Ostriker goes mad at this point. He's fucking going for it. It's like it feels like you're by doing this you have broken like the whole point and the achievement of what you're about to do because you've literally rampaged through the room, but. He fucking goes for it.
He don't give a fuck.
Like when you get the little duo that are like up Tiffany's ass the whole film.
Yeah.
And then when he just comes in and whops her leg straight off.
Yeah.
It's so fucking great with her like there and then looking at her leg and then lops the other guy's head straight off is awesome. Yeah. A few other people get knocked about. The principal gets his arm whopped off.
Yeah.
And then later on gets it placed in front of
back to him. That was good.
Which was funny. And those bits quite cool. Using the obviously Laurie fights back by using her crown to actually go through his eye. Quite cool little visual effects on the eye. Where it's partially like destroyed, like the eye is actually popped, so it looks like it's like part of the eye is left behind. Like all of those kind of parts, all of the kills are so. If you're just looking for that fun slasher, then it gives you the stuff that you mainly want.
Yeah.
After that absolutely awful first one, they're all completely acceptable, serviceable, and above some slashers that I'd say I've seen.
Definitely.
They're good little kills. There's enough like logic in scenes. There's enough one or two kind of moments of chase. I'd say that's fairly limited in this film. There's never really apart from the bit with Laurie, obviously, everyone else is killed in a fairly like swift
contained way.
Which I guess is what they're trying to do, is make people unaware of what's going on, so they achieve that. And yes, that'll work. So obviously the reveal of the killers. So we have good old Chris Klein, Ostriker, or Dan Falcon, as he is here, revealed to be the killer. But we know there's 2 killers, so we're straight away on to who's the other killer?
Who's the other one? Yeah.
And your mind straight away is jumping to Batu, because we even thought at one point the emo friend might end up actually being the way she looks at her like cutting her hand as if she like isn't bothered by it weirdly, like even though it's quite a deep gash, she's like playing with it as if it's like that's
fun.
That's fun.
And that she's like earlier in the film you see her pretending to,
and she pieced the stuff together, so you're just like, could she, because she kind of knew this,
is she a little red herring?
It does make you, but it wouldn't totally worked anyway, because it would have been like, why is she going around telling people and asking people like why would you do that if you already knew?
Yeah, it's pretty obvious.
It's pretty obvious
that
it's
it's
not
Chris Klein's wife.
But this is what I mean, like the red herringy kind of way that they kind of shoot certain people to make them look, and these looks.
It's done quite well.
It is kind of well done, that part where it does make you question a lot of them in different scenes. So that's a stronger kind of part of the film. But the reveal doesn't really come until they're back in the house. Now, Tiffany wanting her nearby after being such a bitch the whole time, but you feel like that is well played, because you feel like she's now remorseful of the fact that her dad is actually a killer. Yeah. And that she's like, shit, I didn't want any of this to happen. So you feel like you're actually getting some remorse from the character. And even the point, you're definitely questioning her, but you're like, even the point when she wants her to go back into the house, and they're both asleep in the bedroom.
Yeah.
So it does enough things to make you think, well, there's plenty. Like, she's freaking both asleep. She could
You could just kill
She
her.
could have sliced her throat at any point here. You know, it's almost after this the mom now makes you think, why didn't she just slice her throat when she was in the bedroom? You know what I mean? Like, she was asleep in your room. You literally could have got your little blade and just sliced her throat and done.
Yeah, just done it.
Yeah, but obviously that would have made you prime suspect.
Yeah,
I
that's right.
guess.
I don't know who killed her. Sorry.
I don't know who killed her. She's just dead.
I just woke up and she was dead.
She's just dead. I don't know whose blood this is.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you know that bit is actually played quite well. That it still kind of throws you off from who it is. Even the mum being questioned and stuff like that, like the doting mother that just wants to get home to the daughter. But by that point, I think you're pretty much left. The only thing is now you're pretty much only left with the conclusion of it can only be the mother or the daughter.
Yeah.
Because there's pretty much no one else in the equation now. They've
Everybody
removed
else is
everyone else
gone.
from.
Yeah.
The only other slight red herring still in the back of my mind was Mum herself.
Yeah.
Of thing suddenly appearing at the house to be like, I'm the other one kind of thing. To be like the character that you forgot about is back kind of thing. Which sometimes they do. Which is not always the best way to do it anyway, because I kind of hate it when they do that, because it's like, I didn't really give a shit about this character, so now here they are.
Yeah.
Hi, we didn't know who you are, and now here you are. Hi. Is that kind of annoying that happens sometimes with these reveals?
Sometimes,
You're just like, yeah, but I don't know you, so why the fuck should I care?
It's probably got to be an unpopular opinion, but like I said, Miss Loomis. Just dog shit.
Mrs. Loomis being a throw off in the back there.
Yeah. Like, oh yeah, you just turn up every now and then as a reporter.
In the background.
In the background,
It's
yeah.
Billy's mother.
Yeah. Very, very good twist. It's definitely not dog shit. Yeah. Anyway.
I'm much more of a fan of it. But
You do. When we cover it, we will discuss.
yeah. Still haven't done Scream.
Well, we have.
We've done only the reboot of Scream, not the original.
No, we did.
No, sorry. We have done. We did do the original Scream film. I don't know how. For a podcast that mentions Scream so bloody often, I'd say.
Yeah.
It's crazy we haven't actually done any of the early Scream films. It's
yeah.
mad, especially when we really both like majority of the Scream
Well,
films.
we did Scream 1 and then it went wrong.
Yeah, we had an audio issue. And then we tried. I'm pretty sure we even tried to do it again. It
Maybe.
had some kind of problem that got in the way. So yeah,
I don't think we could be bothered. One day.
Where was I going with the whole? So the final killer obviously is revealed to be the mother.
Yeah.
When she comes back in the house, literally the second she walks in, just grabs a
And
knife.
just
She's
grabs
like,
a
I'm
knife,
gonna
it's like-
saw her upstairs and kill her. So obviously they had a little arrangement to get her back to the house, kind of thing, to finish her off. Which all just seems very much like at this point where you're just like, well, no one's not going to know what's happened here, though.
Yeah.
She went into your house and you're going to go and kill her, and no one is going to be like,
You just killed her.
you just killed her, right?
You mean your husband
There's
killed all
literally
those
no
people?
one else here who could have done this, so you just killed her, right? Or she's gone missing, and last time she was seen was at your house.
Yeah, at this
and your
point, just
husband
cut your
was a
losses.
killer. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? At this point, go off and live your own life away with it.
Yeah,
but-
just accept that your daughter's not prom queen.
Yeah.
At this point, just accept it. She isn't even prom queen by the time Chris Klein's on his rampage.
No,
because
that's
it's already
it.
been announced.
He killed her as if he's like, I'm still going to be able to change the results by killing you. She'll have to be prom.
She'll have to be.
As if they'll be like, oh, she's dead. Right, pick up the crown and give it to her.
Yeah, give it to her.
Someone has to be prom queen.
Yeah, and
it
then
has to go down. It's like president.
Yeah,
If the president, the vice president has to be in.
he has
It's
to take over.
It's like, yeah, that's how it works with prom queens. It's
There
that
has to be
serious.
one. There must be one. Yeah.
And again, I didn't mind the little showdown at the end.
No,
It's a fun
mate.
little showdown. Mother daughter. I kind of like the whole family dynamic brought in.
Yeah, I
here,
thought it was good.
With almost feeling as if like Chris Klein's Dan is the one that's probably been almost manoeuvred more by the women in his life than actually like he's more of the patsy.
Maybe,
kind of thing.
but it would have been good if we got to know the characters a bit more, and we had that, because
Yeah.
this is also the point where the mum just says, "Oh, the last thing your dad ever saw was my face," and I guess there's some irony that it's going to be the same with you. And oh yeah, I killed your dad because I loved him and wanted him to. to be prom queen.
We needed to see these characters. We needed to see these characters in the what would have been 70s.
Yeah,
we needed to see a flashback to them like in high school in the 70s,
60s or whatever it would have been. Like it would have been interesting,
and to see like the younger versions.
To see the younger versions of them, to see how maybe their lives panned out a little bit, and to have those characters fleshed out a little, because we see Mr. Chris Klein when he's giving the class about aspirations. What do you want to be when you grow up? And then you see him when Melissa's showed off her dress. You see him at the prom where he's like
early
doing whatever,
prom, and then he is kind of gone.
And then he's gone until he's revealed as the killer.
Yeah, so
you
he's
see
obviously the main one going around.
Yeah,
the mum comes.
She's peppered a little bit more.
Yeah,
but it feels like you should have gone more into that idea. Yeah. Like you said, there's probably it's not going to cost.
It would have been fun to see an earlier, like a prom from
an
early, like if you're going to do a prom film, do a prom earlier. Whatever it would have been, late
show
60s,
the massacre,
early 70s, and show that kind of thing. It also gives you the chance to go less with the 80s slasher style and to go more of that earlier gritty 70s slasher.
Yeah.
So you have two different slashers that you can play with almost. That first 10-15 minutes that I said that I think probably could have been added here to add a bit of fleshing out. That first 10-15 minutes should have mainly been doing a flashback to this original night, showing all these characters and not like fully giving away this whole twist and stuff like that, but giving them like a moment of seeing like the mum and the
find out who the characters are,
all kind of interacting a little bit with each other, so we get to know what dad was like and see dad die and whatever and kind of thing like that. Like would have added something to this film even more.
Yeah,
it would have made it better.
Instead, it just feels like they pepper these things in there and they kind of forget about them. And
it's kind of brought up and all it's been is mentioned instead of actually shown, and it's just not quite as interesting as it could have been.
Yeah, it doesn't quite have the same impact.
No. Her little motive where the mum is obviously the mastermind of pretty much all of it. Really, like her vendetta has driven her through decades. Is actually just kind of like. Yeah, well, but we don't know.
We don't know. We don't know. Went to school.
We haven't even seen you interact with the mother. Like you could have at least had an interaction with the mum or something like that somewhere.
They don't
in
interact.
The film, or seen Tiffany's family more in a home setting, so you got a bit more of a sense of their family setting. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I know. Well, actually, we did. We got a scene of like the dress.
But
one scene, but it was a cheesy scene, and it didn't really add much to it.
A scene doesn't make a story. You know, like...
it was, and it literally was just a scene of her coming down in her dress, showing it off, and then being made to look like that perfect, like cheesy family kind of thing.
Yeah,
but it didn't add any like depth or any suspicions or any like deeper rooting. And that is kind of what a lot of this is. It is the more surface level slasher. It doesn't sadly dig much deeper. You got the gore, you got the kills, but there's not much more going on there. And it's weird to say that I think I enjoyed it.
I did.
It's very much that average in the middle kind of one that has elements that could have made it better, but it's hard not to avoid the fact that it is on both ends. As a if it was a random Shudder release, you know what I mean, or Netflix film that was just about this one thing, then it wouldn't be as held against. But it's being held against far better film franchise, which it's part of, but doesn't seem to want to be part of it.
Yeah,
which is really weird.
It's odd. It's kind of the Fear Street. It's the weakest, and then of the films it's trying to emulate, it follows so closely in the footsteps that it repeats a lot of the mistakes. Like I said, it makes a rod for its own back.
It also feels as though, like, to be honest, the way that the film has done it here, where it literally, like, because they don't try to go that extra mile from it, a lot of some of the stuff in here almost could have achieved. They either needed to make it longer, or this almost calls for the idea that you could probably have 1 hour Fear Street episodes where each hour is a different thing, because this also could have been, it's so simplistic in its approach that you probably could have cut a bunch of scenes and actually shortened it just down to basically just over an hour and done a Fear Street TV series of different stories and different you know what I mean?
You probably
like something like that. Like I could almost see it being more like that, but the only problem with this now is with the lower appreciation and probably therefore lower rating that this will get, makes you wonder whether, sadly, Prom Queen could end up being the nail in the coffin of what
Maybe.
could have been a strong, start of a strong kind of interesting franchise, because they took way too long to get this one out. That's Netflix's problem.
Yeah.
They shouldn't have taken this long to get to another one, because it kind of has
It's
dampened people's remembering this thing that they watched years ago. In the horror community, you've got a bit more of a memory of it. In the general community, it'll be like, what was that?
Yeah,
Did we watch that years ago? Was that like Stranger Things?
Well, it's almost got to be like Stranger Things. Like by the time the next one comes out, you're kind of like, maybe the iron's not hot anymore. You know,
and that's what I think. This sadly feels a little bit like it will be one that will temper the idea of actually, should we even revisit it? And I would say yes.
Yeah.
Keep with Fear Street. You just need to honour the actual original ideas that came with the original trilogy. Possibly go back to whoever the original, because I believe, even though there might have been different people directing them, I believe there was someone
There's like a consistent,
the original whole idea. There was a writer of the original Fear Street.
And it feels like that's what it needs, you know?
It definitely needed someone that's a little bit more on it, I think, with these films.
Somebody who's kind of got like a I can't pronounce that last name. Janiak. Yeah, I feel like that's what it is. Lee Janiak.
Yeah.
Yeah. I kind of feel like somebody they were the director and writer of the original three. You know,
that's what I remember seeing. And again, I don't know what happened with that person's relationship with the franchise. Probably because they were like, this is taking too long, I'm going to move on to do something else.
Maybe they just finished. Maybe they finished it. But either way, I feel like they could have had something really a lot more consistent if they'd have just had a vision for where they wanted it to go. I don't know. I kind of agree with you. I feel like it feels like it squanders an interesting premise that it could have had, and it follows too much in the footsteps of what it's trying to emulate, that it ends up committing a lot of the problems of those kind of run-of-the-mill slashers, the ones that didn't really try and push some stuff out. We've covered a lot of slasher films, and there are some that really do try and do some interesting and fresh stuff. You know, the one that comes to mind the most, I'm thinking just off the top of my head, is Sleepaway Camp. You know, we told a great story, but also told it in quite a weird way. You know, whereas this feels like it follows a bit more of the initiation, or something like that, where Prom Night, Terror Train, where you're watching it and you're like, this is okay, but it's flat characters, half-baked ideas, something that's mentioned at the start and then is kind of suspiciously absent right until the very end as just a paper thin motive. Yeah, that's kind of where I feel like it is. I don't think it's completely devoid of fun. I don't think it's
not.
It's awful.
It's definitely an easy horror watch. I think. You could easily just pop that on and be like, yeah, I can have a bit of fun with this kind of thing. But if it had more rooting and more links to the other films and stuff like that, it might have a bit more rewatch value.
Maybe,
as in you want to kind of really watch it. Whereas right now, the problem it served itself is the idea that actually you could watch the original trilogy of the Fear Street films, and then you could be like, I don't need to watch that because it's got nothing to do with it.
Doesn't add anything to it.
It's got nothing new to it. So I think they definitely in the future they need to. Well, from what I can see, Leah Janiak hasn't actually. She's done some things, but she's not done any major. She doesn't seem to be committed to any major franchises or things like that. But what she is married to a Duffer brother who makes Stranger Things. Which was probably why the original Fear Street had so many links to Stranger Things casts.
Maybe.
So it had all of that linked in. What I would say, Netflix, is go back to her and ask her to make more Fear Street.
Yeah, that's
Make her to reinvent it. Don't go to news. So go and ask her if would you be willing to
be coming back.
Either write some more. You don't have to direct them, but at least write some more Fear Street, or be like an overseer. Or as I said, I do also think that based on those little horror stories, that Fear Street could also work well as a little mini-series Or a TV series, hour long episode. Each episode's a different element of Shady Sides. I'm not saying that it would be should run for loads of series. I'm saying maybe one series of 8 episodes or something like that. You could probably get through the majority of the events that happened, like looking back to the original Fear Street and kind of flesh that world out to make it feel like quite right, where maybe some of them, not every single one justifies needing a whole film.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that.
But yeah, so there you go. So yeah, sadly, a bit of a mixed bag.
Yeah,
for our return to Fear Street. Hopefully not our final.
No, I watch another one, and I'll watch this one again, but going in with, like you said, tempered expectations.
Yeah, it's not like the original trilogy where I might rewatch it and be like, it's not quite as good as I like. The old rose tinted glasses might be clicked on.
Might be clicking.
But from what I can remember, I just remember I have been, since I haven't seen it again, but I've always gone past it. Every time it's popped into my head, I've gone, I really need to rewatch this.
Yeah.
And it's just one of those things where when this clicks into my brain again, I don't think I'll be like, I really need to go rewatch that. It'd be like, if I saw it on, or if it was on, maybe I'd watch it, but it's on Netflix, so that doesn't happen unless I turn it on.
No, unless you
it's not like the days of TV where they'd be like, oh, that's on TV, yeah, why not, I'll watch that.
Anaconda
doesn't happen with Netflix. Yeah.
Yeah.
Always Anaconda. You can't not watch Anaconda.
Whenever you go to a hotel, it's always Anaconda.
For the younger viewers out there, that's not the Nicki Minaj video.
No,
it's not
I'm not just
Anaconda.
watching that.
It's the Jennifer Lopez starring.
Yeah, starring Ice Cube and Owen Wilson.
Yeah. So, but sadly with Netflix, these things, if they don't retain any memory and they feel throw away, they literally just end up disappearing into a back catalogue.
Yeah. And
one day probably being cut away.
Probably,
and removed from the streaming service when they decide they need to trim some fat.
They need to prune it, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if you've watched Prom, I was about to call it Prom Night again. If you've watched Fear Street Prom Queen, come let us know your thoughts. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at CMTH Podcast. As always, remember to hit that subscribe button and leave us a lovely review. We will see you soon. Take care and goodbye.